I'll let the panel introduce themselves in a second. I'd like to get across in the first half of this is a few kind of more practical things. I think you'll have, if you turned up yesterday, have never kind of heard the word venture capital before, you'll have heard a lot of terms and jargon being thrown around, like lead and syndicate, and I just want to kind of get these guys to give you a little bit of how, deconstruct some of that and just lay the process out in English. And then we'll go on to some more kind of insights that they can give you in terms of how you take your company forward towards a financing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel. Just ask everybody to give the 30-second version of their biography. So, Debbie, why don't you kick off?
I'll start. I'm Debbie Harland. I'm a partner with SR1 based here in the UK. I've been with the team coming up 10 years now. Prior to that, I've spent many years in drug development with Smith Kline Beecham and GSK, and also latterly in business development with GSK.
Hi, I'm Maina Bhaman. I'm with Imperial Innovations. We're a publicly listed venture fund in the UK. Probably one of the largest early stage investors. In fact, we invested in Puritify, which was a winner of 2 years ago from this competition. We invest all the way from very early and work with the companies right through to exit.
My name is Vishal Gulati. I work for DSJ Esprit. We invest across the digital chain, but my focus is on digital health. But in a prior life, I've been a biotech investor and a diagnostics and device investor.
And Jeanne Bolger, I'm with JJDC, which is the corporate venture arm of J&J.
And Ilan Zipkin with Takeda Ventures.
Ilan's been on every panel.
As with an investor hat on, though, we'll make the distinction between Takeda Ventures, which is largely a passive investor, small ownership percentages, versus my prior involvement with Prospect Venture Partners and MPM Capital, with both of which were lead investors with $1 billion and more under management.
Great. Thanks, guys. So I just want to talk about the process which these guys are going to have to go through in terms of getting you to write them a check, ultimately, because I think they've heard it's painful and it's going to take a long time, but I don't think we really talked about what it involves. So, Debbie, what happens when an email comes in with a presentation, medical device or diagnostic, therapeutic, doesn't matter. What happens when it lands in your email or you get a phone call? What happens then?
Well, I think the first thing to point out, if the email comes in cold or the phone call comes in cold, that's probably not a great place to start. So the first piece of advice I'd give is, if you don't know us personally, find somebody who knows us and get a referral. That's number one, because we'll always pay more attention to something that is referred to us by somebody that we like or know. So that's the first piece. So my first piece of advice is, don't send a cold email, because we probably get hundreds and hundreds of those. And so if you want your idea to get some attention, you've got to find a way to be clever to get attention. Now, assuming you get attention, the next thing that will generally happen is that whoever it came to will take a quick look at it, and depending on where they are in their deal flow, and that also matters, we might come on to that later, and how many other things they're looking at the time, will spend some time thinking about it themselves and talking to a couple of their colleagues about it, and make a decision whether at that point in time you want to learn a little bit more about it. And then the first thing that we generally do, Matt and I and David here in the UK, is that we'll decide to take a quick call or a short meeting to find out a little bit more on a non-confidential basis. So that's the first piece.
And how long does that bit take?
Well, that can take, depending on what else is going on, that can take, if it's something that hits you in the face and you want, and you know the people, or it's been referred to you, then generally we'll respond fairly quickly within 1 or 2 weeks and sort something out, get a quick telephone conference together. That's the quickest. Sometimes if we're really busy and doing other things, that can take anywhere up to 4 weeks. So it's contextual.
Okay. So Maina, you've had a chat internally and decided that this looks interesting enough to learn more,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a call, do you put a CDA in place at that point, or do you insist on kind of getting quite far down the track before you deal with confidentiality?
Yeah, we're reasonably open to having CDAs, but I have to say we won't put a CDA in place until we're pretty interested. We want to learn more. We'll do the first couple of meetings non-confidential, so you've got to have a decent non-confidential pack that tells you enough to get the people really excited, but obviously you don't want to give away all your secrets, so but give them enough, give the investors enough to really dig their teeth into it, because otherwise it's just going to go, yeah, it's too much hard work.
And we'll go all the way to Jeanne. So you've had a CDA in place. You've had a bit of a technical review, and we've decided this is something that looks really interesting. They've heard the term syndication. I don't know if we've really explained what that is and why it's important and what is a lead, and take us through the steps from where you've decided actually this looks like something I want to do.
Okay, well, in our situation, it's not the same for all investors. I mean, there are certainly investors there who won't want to syndicate their deals at all. Syndicating basically just means that an investor takes other investors with them into a deal, and they share the financing of the company between them in some ratio or some proportion that works for them. Like I say, there are plenty of financial investors who, particularly at an early stage, will be quite happy to take the entire burden of the financing of the company on their own shoulders. We typically will syndicate, and we'll syndicate early, and there are financial reasons why we need to do that, quite simply. And I think it's worth just being transparent about that. When you're taking in finance and the sole money to fund the company is coming from the investors, as you heard, yesterday in the discussions yesterday, you are going to have to give out shares in the company, substantial amounts of shares in exchange for that financing. We, however, as an investor, want to take a minority interest in the company. It's important to us not to be a majority shareholder. So we will definitely always want to keep our ownership of the company below 50%, and we will typically prefer to keep our ownership around the 20% mark or less. And that's purely because of the way our investments are treated within our books as a corporation. So we will look to syndicate deals. Then you hear this concept of leading and following. Sometimes that isn't all that meaningful. It can mean that the lead investor is doing most of the heavy lifting in terms of helping to put the financing round together, helping to build the legal documents around that financing round, and indeed helping to build the company if the company's so early that it's a very first financing and a seeding of the company. But oftentimes in the syndicate, that burden will be sort of shared fairly equally among the investors. So we will go out and look for other syndicate partners to invest with us, and we'll invest with people that we like investing with, that we've invested with before, that we know we're sort of like-minded in the way we approach it, and that we feel that together we can put enough capital into this company to take it to that value inflection point that everybody is looking for.
Thank you. And on average, Ilan, what's that start to finish, on average? How long does it take between you hear about a company and you actually end up writing a check across the board? I mean, there's obviously going to be a range, but it's longer than I'd like.
Given that maybe 95% of the companies I've heard about I never write a check for, that's a very, very long time. Those that I do write a check for, I would say, historically in the institutional funds that I was a part of, if we're going to get to an investment, it would happen in a 3 to perhaps 4 month time frame, because you know very quickly whether you're interested. You can, if you are interested, you're going to move quickly on diligence. And in an institutional fund, if you're ready to write a term sheet, write a term sheet. And then you call up your friends and say, hey, I've got this great deal, let's syndicate it and get it done. Unfortunately, being within a corporate VC now, we are beholden to pharma timelines. And there are governance committees and internal processes and legal groups and IP groups and many people who, you know, honestly are doing the best they can at their job, but there's just a lot of them to work with. So it takes longer. So now I would say, you know, it's probably in the 6 to 9 month time frame.
I mean, because in my experience, since I joined SR1, I think with the exception of Peridify, which kind of came together pretty quickly, thanks guys, every deal I've worked on has taken more than 12 months. And that's breaking for me, but it must be absolute hell for the kind of entrepreneur who's looking at his cash balance that's kind of heading towards kind of ground zero. But I think when you start on your fundraising mission, you should just go into it with an expectation this is going to take a long time. So I just wanted to set that scene. So Debbie mentioned about, in terms of how you get access, you know, I think it's pretty intuitive that if you come with a recommendation from another investor or a kind of entrepreneur that company's worked with before, that's obviously better than a kind of cold call. But I want to give the audience a little flavor on elements of what they're offering that make them stand out. And I mean, let's go to Vishal. I mean, from my perspective, as someone who's not really invested much in digital health, I leave that to Jens.
Jens gets all the good stuff.
Yeah, he does. It's all of. You should talk to him about his favorite project in Boston. How do you, especially as a digital health company, how do you stand out from the crowd when you're talking about it's an idea stage? There's no IP. It's you know, it's in the cloud somehow. There's an app, but how do I
Somehow. Yeah.
how do I get your
so exciting.
how do I get your attention?
I think it's very interesting, and I've been learning alongside my colleagues who have invested in digital companies before, and they, you could ask the same question about the whole of the internet investment industry. That how do you know that this company that sells shoes is better than another company that also sells shoes? But there are some companies that sell shoes better than anyone else sells shoes. So there is a way to do that, and what's different is that the metrics are very different. So the things that we look for are quite different in the sense, if you just look at the risk structure of biotech versus digital health, which I've often had to compare. So the de-risking of a biotech project happens in large chunks. So you will have a major investment of several £100,000 when you do the talks of a particular product. At that point, you will have a binary outcome saying this is great or this is not. In digital, this happens every day, every night. So if these companies get de-risked over a long period of time in small chunks. So the way we do it is we test out how are we going to get people interested in a particular product, and we test different ways of doing that. And we have very interesting ways of looking at what is working and what's not working. So when we look at a particular digital product that is direct to consumer, for example, we know the difference between the cost of customer acquisition of one company and another company, and we can see it changing every day. We can see which companies are better at retaining customers and having them buy things. So for example, we know that there are certain companies in which every user buys something 2.5 times a year, and there are others where they buy 8 times a year. And there are reasons why that happens. And so there is science behind that, but it's just a different way of looking at things. So we can, you know, it's not just a complete crapshoot. That's right.
No, that was not my... That's actually extremely interesting, because I'd love hands up who's got digital health as their kind of primary. There's more than just you.
No, there's more.
There's more to
There's definitely more.
They're admitting it now. It's not to be ashamed. There's a significant number out there, trust me. Trying to get some of those metrics that you're focusing on across to the teams, maybe later in the kind of one-on-one sessions would be
Sure.
great. I don't think we want to kind of walk through them all, but
Sure.
I'm actually quite interested in how you see
Sure.
things. With it.
Yeah, I mean, I would not want to overemphasize them because, again, team is very important. So we're not just looking at a dashboard and we're just looking at these numbers and we'll pick whoever reaches the highest number. So it's just like any other investment in biotech or anywhere, the team is extremely important because things will change, your external environment will change. Amazon might start selling the same product as you are selling. So there are many different things that can happen. So I don't want to overemphasize the metrics dashboard, but there are ways of looking at it.
Yeah. No, that's extremely interesting. So if we go back to kind of, I guess the equivalent in biotech is, great science solving unmet need in terms of the panel. So with the assumption that everybody here is doing great science that's really pushing towards an unmet need in some form, what can they do to tick, what boxes do you want ticked beyond that in terms of, these are young guys who've done it, never done it before, what can build their credibility? What can they proactively go and do? I mean, they've got the science, that's beyond putting another 2 million into advancing the science, which is they obviously can't do because that's why they're here. What can they do to help themselves?
They really need to understand the market. They need to understand what the competition looks like, what other people are doing to solve the same problem. It's not necessarily the exact same situation, but you really need to understand how other people are approaching the same issue. And I think that gives you a bunch of credibility. The other thing is really understanding the different steps and where the de-risking points are. So getting that across to investors is really important. Knowing it yourself is really important. Knowing what it's going to cost to get there, knowing what the next steps are going to look like. And if you've done your homework, that's when the investors look at you and say, okay, you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and on that point, I think, Maina quite rightly mentioned that what does the market look like? It's not only what it looks like now, it's what is it going to look like when your product comes through to maturity. That could be very different. So be aware of what's going on in your area of development as well. And I think implicit in that is, as Matt said, great science, everybody's got great science. Have a very clear understanding, or as clear as you possibly can, as early as you possibly can, of what the product is going to look like and how that's going to be viewed within the competition in 5, 7, whatever many years it is as you get it through the process. If you've done your homework on that, nobody can understand all of the details on that at a very early stage, but showing us that you've thought that through gives you a lot of credibility.
Matt, just to encourage people to learn their history. And we saw in the experienced entrepreneur panel, right, that people were starting gene therapy companies 20 years ago. I was going to say it's before many people here were born, but that's almost not true. That's a lot of experience. There's a lot of history that people have seen gene therapy companies, and so what's different now? What's different about your approach than the 300 companies that have tried it before?
Yeah. One of the things that it occurs to me is that different investors, and you heard some of this yesterday, different investors have different kind of preconceived biases on what they want companies' business models to look like. Some people like single asset versus platform, for example. And if I'm an entrepreneur, I just want someone to give me, ultimately I want the best investor I can, but in the end, I just want cash to let me do what I want to do. And given there's so much pressure to get that money. I sometimes find that early entrepreneurs risk kind of contorting themselves into what they think the investor wants, as opposed to what they think is actually the best thing for the business. Obviously, we've heard about feedback. John has talked about iteration in terms of your business plan. Do you think you go with do as much diligence on what that investor likes investing in, and then go with a version of your business plan that fits that need? Or do you just turn up and say, this is the right thing to kind of to address this problem?
I think you pitch to investors that will want to invest in your plan. So you don't pitch to, if you know certain companies like certain things, then you pitch, you don't pitch a completely different business model to them. They probably won't like it. So I think you focus on investors that are going to invest in your type of technology, product, single asset versus platform. There are certain investors, and you can look at their portfolio. It's reasonably easy to do. You look at their portfolio, you can tell what certain investors like and what certain investors don't like. So go focus on the ones that are likely to invest in you rather than fit your business model to a particular investor.
Yeah, because I think that's the biggest mistake. I don't know if everybody else, despite there being, we've all got websites, you can all see our portfolios, we still get people coming to us with things that clearly don't fit what we do. And it's a little frustrating. So there is an element, know your audience, understand, do your homework, and that combined with the email bombing is the most, is the worst thing you could possibly do. So know your audience, as Maina says, do your homework, get a contact, and if it helps, have an initial dialogue before you send your plan in.
Yeah, I have a rule now. So I used to respond to every email I got. There was a time when I used to do that because when I was little, my mom said, anyone writes to you must write back. But then now I revised that rule slightly to say that if you send me a business plan in something that from our website we don't do, then I don't owe you a response. Because essentially you're carpet bombing, and I don't think that... So taking Debbie's earlier point, I think that the response, sometimes the whole idea of getting an introduction is just a kind of a barrier where at least if you went up to someone and said, do you know Debbie, this is my business idea, they would say, but they don't even invest in that. So that filtering mechanism is a part of that whole process. So by all means, send me an email which is without an introduction, but if you send me an email for something which is in food or agriculture, these words don't exist on our website if you search for them. So I will not respond back. This is what happens.
And if you don't get an email back from whoever, they did get your email.
Yeah, don't resend it.
Yeah.
So actually, I'd say, in defense of entrepreneurs, my experience of both being in the investment world and being in the business development world, that entrepreneurs, in the main, there are a few carpet bombers out there, right? But in the main, they're doing what you guys are doing here. They're doing their homework. I get more of those sort of carpet bombing emails from TTOs, dare I say it, and investment bankers, and consultants acting on behalf of companies for exits, like a lot more.
Yeah.
Maybe they get incentivized for how many
Who really
emails they
should
send, right?
Really
Maybe they have some kind of an arrangement that I'll send 100 emails for you or something like that. I don't know what's going on.
Also, Matt, to your question, though,
It's like Google.
even if you've done your homework and there's still 10 VCs that are looking for exactly what you're doing, so you're going to go pitch to those 10, you will get feedback that is different from all 10, and you could come up with 10 different business plans as a result. So you can't pitch a different plan to each of those VCs, right? If you've done your work, you should know what the best path forward is. And if all 10 tell you you're wrong, well, okay, let's think about it. But if you give them a different story, then when those 10 VCs go to a cocktail party and say, hey, I just saw this great idea, they're going to do X. And the other VC says, well, I just saw this great idea and they're going to do Y. You're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Remember,
can I
VCs
say-
talk to each other.
Yeah.
They're defending entrepreneurs here because you've got the majority against you. In this respect. It is very hard for even an experienced entrepreneur to know, even if your fund's got money.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but a lot of you don't even say, oh, by the way, we did invest in those. I'm not saying it's you guys, but I think you guys have all got that. I'm not sure about one. A lot of people that have finished investing or end of fund don't say it, right?
That's true.
And two, just because you invested in the past doesn't mean you won't invest in the future.
But it is okay
So
to ask.
I don't think it's a case of just looking at the website.
No, but it's okay
and
to
try
ask.
to work out
Yeah.
what the hell it was. I mean, I'm not saying don't copy online, but it's not that easy.
No, I think
guys.
that's fair. I
It's
think that's
not
fair.
easy
I think there is-
people that have just cut, some of these people just doing their PhDs, for God's sake, to try and work out there's more than 5 VCs in the world. To work out even what you guys would invest in, right? Never mind I don't know what the number of, what's the number? 200,000 to 300,000
Of what?
of VC
VCs.
funds in the world. It's
Wow.
not that easy, right? It's
But
really not
I
easy.
do think,
But I do agree, you can't try to tailor your business model
To everybody.
each different VC,
Yes.
because it's hard enough working out what they might invest in, so that's
And I think that was really the point, is don't tailor it.
Don't.
Go talk to 1 or 2 people.
Get the
Test your
feedback.
plan.
Yeah.
Test your plan, test it early. You might have to adapt your plan because you don't always have the best plan at the outset. There are VCs with lots of experience, and if you find the right sort of person that gels with your business or you, they will help you. They will help you adjust your plan. If they think it's interesting enough, they will help
And
you.
they like you.
Yeah.
yeah,
And then the second thing is that the problem nowadays, which was easier when I did a lot of the other companies, is syndication. Now you're all wise nodding, we'll syndicate with them. But we don't know who you'll syndicate with. We have no idea who you'll syndicate with. So you might know who your preferred syndicate partners are, but we don't know. And never mind carpet bombing, we may be going just to your syndicate members, which is sort of duplication, isn't it? So you're not, is there a list of who you would syndicate with? We don't know who that is.
Look, that's. I think that's behind the curtain, and I think it needs to be, and it doesn't need to be in front of the curtain. Well, I really don't think so. I think
Okay.
that happens at the back end, and I don't think that's something that entrepreneurs need to know or understand. But to your point, I mean, I think it's absolutely fair. I spent 15 years in business development. I've only been 2 years investing. Investing's been a complete eye-opener for me. There are loads of things that I absolutely didn't know at all. And, Debbie and I worked together in business development, and I'm sure she's 10 years now investing. I'm sure she'll admit to having been, the first couple of years having been 9. It's a completely new world, and you guys are kind of entering into that. And I think early stage startup financing is very difficult. And it's, the VCs are not necessarily going to be your first port of call, okay?
Yeah.
So think about, where's a sensible starting position for a startup business, really? If you're in academia, trying to spin out of academia, use the academic network, use the TTOs, use the partnering events that the TTO offices convene to try and get those first introductions, and pick people's brains big time, because really,
yes.
I can't imagine how difficult it is at the other side, really. So yeah, it's not an exact science, There's no secret recipe to how to do this, I would say.
Can I add one thing to the tailoring thing? The one thing that's also very important is that the VC industry is a cottage industry. It's a very small number of
Yeah.
people, so you have to be really on message. You have to have the same message. You tell your story. If you start telling different stories,
Yeah.
it'll come out.
It'll
because
come
we
out.
all know each other. We all talk to each other. It's pretty scary, actually. So, I mean, it's actually a good thing, if 2 investors meet each other and say, how did
Did you
I
meet
saw that
so-and-so?
company, and they both heard the same thing. That's actually great, because very often investments happen. You're not 100% sure, you're kind of on the fence. then you meet another one, and you know they kind of saw the same story, and then they say, well, if you think that way, why don't we do it together?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I think it's
true.
very important to stick to your story and don't tell different stories, and be aware that we all talk to each other. We know each other. It's a very, very small industry.
Yeah.
I agree. I was just trying to lead the witness a little. Okay, well, just sticking on kind of on the approach and the pitch. I thought what's kind of more helpful is to talk about what not to do in your pitch rather than to kind of lay out kind of soup to nuts what actually you need to do. So I'm going to ask the panel to give the audience their kind of pet hate when they see company come in to pitch. My pet hate is we spend the first 10 or 15 minutes explaining to me why healthcare budgets are under pressure, or people are dying of cancer, and that market is billions big. Yeah, that's mine. Just tell me
why you're solving
exactly what problem you're solving about, and assume I'm aware that there are health economic issues in the system. That's my pet hate. So, Ilan, you're first.
I'll say two, actually, because I'm first. To go along with that, not just healthcare budgets, but I have heard of diabetes. But no, my pet hate is exaggerated market size.
Oh, yes.
Come on.
Yeah.
I guarantee you nobody here has a $10 billion product. Guarantee.
That's mine.
And I mentioned it, I think, yesterday as well. Exactly what you described, Matt, is definitely a pet hate of mine. And then slide 2, what your exit is going to look like, by the way.
Yes.
I am going to help you to a $400 million or a $1.2 million exit. Thank you very much. And
in 2 years.
All my problems right there.
Yeah, I've seen people very helpfully do multiple and IRR calculations for me. So in the end of the slide saying, if you invest in my company now, in 7 years from now, which they have projected very well, they know what further investments will happen and at what valuation. Everything's been worked out, and this is the IRR that you will get at the end of it. But my pet hate is when people say we have no competitors.
Yeah, that was.
Sorry if I stole that.
We have no
But
competition.
the idea that you have no competitors can only mean two things. Either this is the best deal I will ever do in my life, or you are addressing a market that no one's interested in. So this is because if there's a road on which only you are driving, it goes to nowhere, right? Because nobody else is on that road. So that's so if I see that we have no competitors, it's not a good sign. I like a little bit of competition.
Or they haven't done their homework and there's plenty of competition.
Yeah, flexibility badly on the team, yes, of course.
I think I agree with all of them, but also when people tell you, oh, I can't tell you about my product because it's a secret, or we haven't filed the IP and therefore we can't tell you anything about our product. Don't ever do that in an investor pitch. You've got to get people interested, so don't ever do that. We had that happen last year at a few of the pitches.
Well, we had.
Yeah.
I think we delivered a slightly more robust IP session to them kind of 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah. So tell people about your product, just don't tell them about the secret sauce.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, we have no competition. We can't tell you because it's secret. We're going to be a $10 billion product. That's really the pet hate.
All right, well, take note of those.
And actually, remember on the IP issue and being worried about it, you only compromise your ability to acquire your IP and solidify your IP with public disclosure. Telling somebody in a one-on-one setting is not alerting the world. No one else knows, so it's not as if someone can go search my brain and find out that you've disclosed a particular thing. The only time to be worried about one-on-one disclosure is if you're talking to somebody who you think might go steal your idea. That's a different story. But you're not going to compromise the patentability by telling me what you're doing.
Yeah, and typically, I mean, we're investors. Our job is to invest in stuff, not go and start businesses. So we're not going to We're not going to steal your idea, even if we're not. Anything you talk to us about, we treat as confidential, even if there's no confidentiality framework in place. I think that's fair to say, guys.
But all those pharma scientists, watch out for that.
Yeah.
There's one exception, and that's really chemical.
Yeah.
Yes.
Never,
Chemical structures.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
chemist.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if it's a confidential meeting, this thing is long, it's in there. So,
You're all right showing
chemical
him.
structures,
Do-
you know,
show 'em to
that's
me.
the
I'm
last
not-
thing you ever.
Yeah, but you're not going to go out and synthesize it, though.
Yeah, but it's my head. I mean, what I do.
but there's no reason, there is no reason you have to disclose
It's
chemical
no.
structures at any point in time.
That's-
The reality is you need to tell people what your product is,
Yes.
what you're doing. Don't hide that bit, but don't necessarily give them the secret sauce. But
You can get a CDA first.
Yeah.
You will have to disclose the structure. I mean, I'm not going to invest in a company unless I see the molecule.
eventually.
Get a CDA before you do that.
Okay. As you heard yesterday, there's a cycle, on a kind of default basis, there's a bit of a cycle of funding, and you might, when you do first start your company, the first money in may not be VC money. And so you may have been up and running 4 years before you end up kind of in Debbie and my office. Quite often we see companies that if we'd seen them 4 years earlier, we could have told them to do things very, very differently and be in a much better place to get VC financing. I was going to ask the panel if they've had similar experiences and what some of the common mistakes companies have made and set in motion before they get into their offices. One for me is kind of a lack of transparency to their original investors about how long and costly this was going to take. You heard about angel investors yesterday, and that they often can resist dilution. The easy way to mitigate that is you're very honest up front that this is going to take 10 years and $50 million, and they're going to end up with kind of 0.5% of the company at the end. If you say that to them up front, they're smart people. They may be in a consumer background, not a biotech background, but they'll understand that concept. It's when you are promising to cure cancer in 18 months and they'll own 50% of the company that you get yourself into that position. So share structure. But one of the team panel could give us any more perspectives.
I think maybe one of them, Matt, I don't know if you talked about this yesterday, and it can come home to bite you. If you have got technology coming out of a university or an institution and you've negotiated your agreement, your license, there could very well be certain terms in there that are not very investor friendly. So use fora like this, or come to investors early. If you think you're going to need VC-like investors later on in the life cycle of your company, come early and have a discussion about the things which perhaps show up red flags to investors down the line about structuring and numbers in early deals with universities and other institutions.
Valuation's another one. So overhyped valuations too early tends to put VCs off. So your early investors get, if you do end up taking VC money later on, your early investors get diluted significantly, and that makes for, and management teams, and that makes for unhappy people.
Yeah, I think angel investors love good news stories, so sometimes you end up tailoring your business in that way, or at least communicate in that way. So the best way to raise money from angel investors to say, oh, I'm building the Facebook of healthcare, and so they start seeing lots of different zeros at the end of that figure. And then when, and I think you want to be able to give them a full risk-based analysis of your business, even if that means that some of those people will not invest in your business. Because that's the right thing to do, because things often get harder as time goes by. They never get easier. So sometimes I end up meeting angel investors in the companies that we're looking at investing in, and their view of what this business is so different from what it really is, that it's very hard to find a point where we can agree with them on pretty much anything. And that's really, really harmful for your business going forward.
I'm not sure I have anything to add to that.
Yeah,
I think between IP and angel investors with
And
high
valuations,
valuations, you know, that's.
I'm going to throw in one extra then. Because of the angel issue or the kind of lack of access to financing, there's a lot of companies we see where you've got a technology and you could potentially do lots of things with it. One of which is to go and generate revenue by giving other people access to it on a fee-for-service basis. And the kind of the dream scenario for the angel investor is that you generate revenues by doing a little bit of work over here for someone, and then that money finances the internal development of the program. And it's a really attractive diagram on a piece of paper. But in the end, what typically happens is the company increasingly is always short of cash, and all of the effort of the business goes into chasing that revenue, and nothing ends up happening with the kind of core value driver of the company. Then you come to the VC, and we've got a company that's totally skewed towards a business that we're not interested in at all, and you never get financing from these guys over here.
So if you have a service business that can finance a whole program, then you don't need VC, right? So you could just list that business on the market and make money from just that.
But
so it really
But
is.
you can't be a product
But
development
it is
business.
difficult in life science businesses to actually accomplish that particular structure, because the reality is that if you're revenue generating on one side of the business already, then most of the resources, both the human and financial resources of the company, will in fact be going towards sustaining that revenue generating business. And it's very difficult then. It's essentially a different business, to try and build, say, a pipeline on the side, and you know what gets priority. It's very difficult to do that. It has been done, but I think you need to be very thoughtful about how you go about that. I mean, I've seen situations where, if the revenue part of the business is completely self-sustaining already at the get-go, and then you're very deliberately going out to raise new financing for the company to build the pipeline, and the resource of the company are following that financing, the human resources, then, it can be done that way, I guess.
Yeah, if you're generating revenue early, then you're generating revenue from a product that's not regulated. Because if it was regulated, you wouldn't be able to sell it early. And generally the revenue stream from a non-regulated product is not enough to fund the development of a regulated product.
Yeah,
So.
Thanks. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go for some Q&A. It might be helpful for the crowd to hear the other kind of more intangible ways that this is a bit of an advert for you guys. I think John gave the pharma guys a free advert earlier. So what other processes do we as investors help our companies with? We give them money. We heard yesterday that there's a difference between kind of a check and a check that comes with kind of bells and whistles. What are those bells and whistles? What should they be asking help with from you?
I think networks is the biggest thing. So whether it's pharma, whether it's other venture investors, whether it's management, all those sorts of things. So it's the networks that we bring to bear on our businesses.
Yeah, and I think particularly with the SR1 perspective, we have many examples of while we're firewalled from our mothership at GSK, we can reach in to help with significant issues around discovery questions, development questions, manufacturing. There's a huge resource there. And I think we've got several examples of where that's been really helpful for our portfolio companies.
I think being an investor in your business gives us the license to brag about you all the time to whoever we meet. And that's very, very important. So whenever we meet other investors, whether we meet people in the pharma industry or potential acquirers or customers, being an investor in you gives us the right to talk about you endlessly. And we allow that our other co-investors to talk to us about the investments they have made. So we will constantly big you up, and that's a part of the service we bring. And that may help you.
I would say practice the following sentence. When your other companies experienced X, what did they do?
Yeah. That's right.
I know, just that's a very, you know, obviously kind of, you can talk to one entrepreneur who may have had kind of 2 or 3 biotech companies, and that's a really successful entrepreneur. But we have 40 biotech companies at any given time, and we're seeing all kinds of, you know, CEO falling apart issues, CMC falling apart issues, all of this stuff that we're seeing constantly. You know, we should somehow be able to kind of help you find. I mean, I spend a lot of my time interviewing new personnel for my portfolio companies. So I don't know, I kind of see myself as a bit of a dog's body quasi-management team.
Yeah, that's how we see you.
Yeah, I know.
And especially in an early stage company, right? I think as investors in early stage companies, we recognize, you know, we've got to roll up our sleeves and help out.
Exactly, yeah.
So don't be, again, I'm kind of going around the houses to make a point. Don't be afraid to ask your investors to actually get up their asses and do something in helping you build their business, because it's in their interest.
So we shouldn't just be turning up at the board meeting every quarter and then disappearing.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
It's in their interest as much as yours for your business to succeed.